Welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're talking with Duncan Koerber, author of Crisis in a Tweet. Duncan, great first and second segments there. Lots of good information and some case studies I hope people really pay attention to when they read your book. You talk about something else in your book, another term that you've got that I'd like to ask you about, and that's called tweet archaeology. Can you explain what that is?
Well, we've had social media now for, I guess we're coming up on almost 2 decades of social media platforms. And some of us have been on, Facebook for many, many years. I've been on Twitter, now X, I guess since probably 2012, 2013. And I've posted a lot, over the years, stuff I've totally forgotten about. And what I noticed in a lot of the case studies in the book when I was researching this is there's kind of a new tactic where people will, when somebody becomes prominent, so in your life, you get to a new position and or a celebrity, or somebody becomes a celebrity, maybe they become more famous, or a company does something bigger and better and gets more noticed. Certain people on the internet tend to go back and start reading all their old tweets. And these might go back, to 2010 or 2009 or, these kind of things. And it's so easy now. You can just search, right? You can just go into these social media and search keywords and find things that people had written and posted many years ago. And so in the book, I term this tweet archaeology. So when we think of like archaeologists in Egypt, digging up bones or that kind of a thing, pyramids and going in and finding things. Well, there are people, and usually they're partisans. They're not our friends. They're partisans. They're troublemakers, that kind of thing. They will immediately just go into somebody's archive, somebody's social media archive, and find what they posted, and then take it out of context often and bring it to the present. So in the book, I talk about how we always think we in our current time are the most enlightened people. We look at people in the past and we say, how could you have said that? Or how could you have done that? Nowadays, a lot of us look at people who smoke cigarettes back in the day and like, how could you have smoked cigarettes? I mean, isn't that obvious that you shouldn't have been doing that? There's also things that we have, discourses today about racism and sexism. We're very sensitive to those things. And so somebody's tweet from years ago that maybe would cross a boundary now is brought to the present. A good example of this is Kevin Hart. Everybody knows Kevin Hart, the famous actor, comedian. And a few years ago, he was getting more and more famous, and he was actually selected to be the host of the Oscars, which is a huge achievement for an actor himself. Uh, and for a black man to be hosting it, it was a big deal. That was the discourse of the time. And the second it was announced, people started doing their tweet archaeology. And they went back to, I think it was 2010. So that was like 8 years before, 8 or 9 years before. And they found that he had made some very offensive jokes, things that homophobic jokes. Similarly, there was a director, James Gunn, who directed the Guardians of the Galaxy films. They did the same thing with him. They went back and he actually had some jokes that joke about, like they're almost, pedophilia jokes, like joking about children. And people bring those to light and say, what an awful person Kevin Hart is, what an awful person James Gunn is. They should be fired. They shouldn't be allowed to work in Hollywood anymore. And these were big crises. And I know Kevin Hart, he was very troubled by it. And he did some crisis communication response, some damage control, just videos on Instagram, talking to his fans, and apologizing and saying, he's not that person, that kind of a thing. He's not the same guy. He's grown. He wouldn't make those jokes anymore. But there's a lot of that going around in a lot of these crises in the book is tweet archaeologists just going around, and when you become famous, they try to bring you down by bringing those things out of context. And so what do people do in those situations? I talk in the book about disassociation, like you talk about how you've grown and you wouldn't make those jokes today, or you wouldn't talk like that today. But it's a very easy target, I find, for social media crises. It's very easy for people to just go back because you've got how many hundreds and thousands of tweets do you have, or on any social media site? How many posts have you made over the years? I mean, there's so many things that once you become famous, they can go back and check these things. There is a little caveat there in the book. I talk about how some people are starting to realize the tactic, and audiences are starting to see that it's a very cynical tactic, and then attacking the archaeologists sometimes and giving people a break and saying, okay, yeah, that was the past. It's like your grandfather saying something. You're kind of like, yeah, he's from a different time. He's not like that. We're not going to criticize him for this today, that kind of a thing. So it's changing a bit. But yeah, that's tweet archaeology, just a tactic for creating a social media crisis.
That just seems like going after people for the fun of it. Let's just find something, anything
Yeah.
to, maybe get likes for your own site. Be damned with the impact it has on Kevin Hart or James Gunn or
Yeah.
many other people that it happens to. If I get the likes, that's all that matters.
Well, in the book, I talk about a huge media shift over the last 20, 30 years from mass media, journalists and editors, and they were the gatekeepers. They wouldn't write about these kind of things. You write about important things in the newspaper, on the nightly news, but because those gatekeepers have been thrown aside and anybody can post anything, I talk in the book about how now there's a lot of this kind of like online news sites and celebrity sites and things like that that they need to draw attention to them. And one way of doing that is to do this tweet archaeology and cause these reputational crises for famous people because it just gets views. So you're right. It's just getting that attention that can drive then advertising revenue for these. These aren't the New York Times and the 60 Minutes of the old days. This is kind of trashy media, social media sites, and so it helps them get those views. But it is an unethical, I think, tactic to try to draw these posts from the past and make them a big deal now.
Yeah, tabloid news makes the headlines,
Yeah.
or what was the old paper you used to see years ago? National Enquirer?
Yeah, the
Is that it?
Inquirer, the
With those silly
checkout of
stories, Bigfoot is my husband and those kind of
yeah,
things. Well, now those stories get likes, and like you just said, advertisements, people make money off of that. So now if you can go after a person with a silly story and make money off of it, what's to
yeah,
stop them from doing it?
yeah. So that's driving it as well.
Yeah, that's crazy things, crazy things.
Yeah,
Based on that, though, do you think there should be some sort of, well, you used the word gatekeeper.
yeah.
Should we have some sort of a gatekeeping governance oversight or something so that some of this unnecessary misinformation, disinformation, and, attacks on people, you know, don't occur?
Yeah.
Is there any thought to that?
Well, we do have on X, this is something that came about during COVID, was the ability to have community notes and the community can flag a post and say this is incorrect or this is wrong. In the book, I talk about in the final chapter, kind of reckoning, the reckoning that we've seen here. How do we go forward? Do we still look at these things as real crises that matter? And in the book, I do argue that I think they don't matter, and it's only these mobs of people and groups that are elevating these tiny little posts into a big deal. And that part of the book is to try to convince people about how unethical a lot of these crises are, how they're run by bots often. The attention is from bots, unethical people, partisans in echo chambers that are trying to just denigrate people. All of this, I think by the end of the book, if you see these things as rational situations that you haven't read it that closely, right?
Right.
It's that's what the argument I'm trying to make. And in the end, we can't legislate anything or mandate anything on these sites. We can only just educate and change perspectives on these things. Because a lot of people, there's still crises today, but 10 years ago, it was really at its height, where people would see these things pop up and they would get outraged. They're like, wow, how could somebody say this or post this? How could somebody like the wrong tweet? And in the book, I talk about someone who was on the board of directors of the University of BC, and he liked a tweet that had something to do with Donald Trump. And an online activist or an on-campus activist group complained, like, how could one of our leaders of the university be liking a post about Donald Trump? And he had to resign. And I remember that one really struck me as a situation that is just when you're talking about blowing something out of proportion, somebody likes something and then they have to resign their position. I mean that just it's just so exaggerated. And I hope by the end of the book, people kind of see it for what it really is. In the earlier in the book, I talk about how if somebody said these things in conversation, at the bar or on the street, these things that you see in tweets, most of the time you would just laugh it off or dismiss it, or you might even tell the person, "Hey, don't say that," or you shouldn't say that. But in those situations, you wouldn't call up their boss and say, fire the person and things like that. So by the end of the book, I'm trying to make an argument that we shouldn't see these as a big deal. Even though throughout the book, I'm talking about how significant they are to so many people, but we really shouldn't see it as that. And organizations, I say, shouldn't be so quick to discipline or fire employees who maybe get into these situations and harming their livelihoods, just to get rid of them, like to solve the problem so quickly. When a lot of these are just made up situations, they're unethical situations. Don't be so quick to fire people for posting or liking something. That's kind of the message by the end of the book that I'm hoping people get.
Well, we've come to the end of the show, Duncan. Is there anything else you'd like to maybe convey a message, maybe something we didn't cover here that you'd like people to know?
I think the book is useful for researchers because I do research into this, but it's also written in a way that I hope, PR practitioners, social media managers, crisis management professionals read and kind of take to heart because there's a lot to learn, I think, from many of these cases. I think there's close to 100 cases in the book, dealt with in different depths, and just learning from them and getting a sense of all these things so that, when you know, get into these situations and hopefully you can prevent them. But if you do get you or your company gets into these situations, that you can deal with them ethically. And I talk about it. It's funny thing is I say near the end of the book that maybe you don't have to respond at all.
Mm,
Because if you believe these are unethical situations, if you believe it's bots, if you believe the people who are complaining about a post are not even your people, they're not your stakeholders, they're some group that you would never sell a product to or have anything to do with. If it's those people, maybe the solution here is you don't have to respond at all. You can just ignore it and just move on and not waste your
yeah.
time, your time and your resources of your organization to actually have to deal with these situations. So that's just one point that comes up later in the book that I hope people take from it.
Well, it makes sense. Just because something is posted, you're not obligated to respond.
Yeah.
Because maybe that's the part that gets you into trouble, is
Yeah,
simply
you can have a
feeling
secondary
you are
crisis.
obligated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Duncan, thank you so much for joining us. Excuse me, losing my voice here.
Yeah.
Thank you much for joining us. Congratulations once again on your book, Crises in a Tweet. I have read it. I haven't got my physical copy yet, otherwise I'd hand it up.
Yeah.
But everyone take a look at it. Duncan mentioned there are 100 cases in there. There are some really interesting ones in there as well. So I do recommend it. So thank you so much for joining us, Duncan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.